Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. It was a cold January night in Reykjavik, and Birna Brjánsdóttir was enjoying a night out with friends. The city felt safe, just like it always had. But in the early hours of the morning, something went wrong. Surveillance cameras captured her last moments, walking alone, slightly unsteady, heading toward the sea. Then she vanished. At first, no one panicked. But as hours turned into days, it became clear. This wasn't just a night out gone too far. Something terrible had happened to Birna. And when the truth came out, it shook the entire nation. Born in 1996 in Iceland, Birna Brjánsdóttir was the daughter of Silla and her husband Brjáns. Despite their eventual separation, her parents remained committed to co-parenting, ensuring that Birna grew up with the love and support of both. By the time she turned 20, she was a lively young woman with auburn hair and a sharp sense of humor. She chose to move in with her father, who lived in the suburbs of Reykjavik. From there, it was just a 30-minute walk to the city, a convenience she appreciated. Independent and determined, she preferred earning her own money rather than relying on her parents. Birna's life mirrored that of many young women her age. She was creative, fun-loving, and effortlessly made friends. One of them once described her as a pill of happiness because of her constant enthusiasm for both big and small moments in life. Financially stable thanks to her job in the fashion department of a large department store, she felt lucky. However, above all else, Birna cherished the time she spent with loved ones and the simple joys that made her happy. On the night of Friday, January 13th, 2017, Birna and her friends followed their usual routine, heading to a popular downtown club. Confident and carefree, she was among the first to get on stage and dance to the live music. Around 2 a.m., her friends decided to leave, but Birna chose to stay a little longer. At approximately 5 a.m. on Saturday, January 14th, just before closing time, she finally left the club. Later that morning, when Birna failed to show up for her shift, her friend Maria grew concerned. It was unlike Birna to miss work, even after a late night out. Maria, who had been friends with Birna since primary school, immediately tried calling her phone. But it was turned off, something Birna never did. Alarmed, Maria reached out to the friends who had been with Birna the night before. They all said the same thing. They had left early, assuming Birna had gone home afterward. To be sure, Maria called her father's house, but Birna wasn't there either. With growing anxiety, she contacted Silla, Birna's mother. The news shook her. Birna was strong-willed and independent, but also responsible. She always let her parents know where she was. By that afternoon, a missing person report had been filed with the police. Desperate for answers, Silla took to social media, posting about Birna's disappearance and urging people to share the message in hopes of finding her. Within hours, her plea spread like wildfire, accumulating thousands of shares. Yet there was no sign of Birna. That night, Silla stayed awake, making frantic calls to emergency services, desperate for any update. But as the hours passed, the silence remained unbroken. At 9 a.m. on Sunday, the police provided a crucial update. Berna's phone had been connected at 5:50 a.m. the previous morning to a cell tower in an industrial area of Hafnarfjordur, a port city located 9 kilometers south of Reykjavik. Upon learning this, Sila, accompanied by several family members and close friends of Berna, drove straight to the location. They knocked on doors, calling out her name, hoping for any clue that could lead them to her. But their efforts were in vain. There was no trace of Berna anywhere. Scylla grew increasingly desperate, haunted by the thought of whether her daughter had found shelter from the freezing temperatures. By then, Berna had been missing for nearly 36 hours, and Scylla was convinced that something was terribly wrong. Yet, to her frustration, no official search had been launched. The police hesitated to act without concrete evidence of a crime. With law enforcement slow to mobilize, the media became the most powerful tool in spreading the word. Journalists had picked up the story, and by Sunday evening, Iceland's two largest television networks reached out to Scylla for interviews. She didn't hesitate. If speaking to the press meant more eyes on her daughter's case, she would do it. That night, the story of the young woman who had vanished from one of Reykjavik's busiest streets dominated the evening news, sending shockwaves through the nation. By Monday morning, Berna's disappearance was on everyone's lips. In shops, on buses, and at workplaces across the country, people speculated on what could have happened. The case struck a nerve, not just because of the mystery surrounding it, but because it was unfolding in one of the world's safest nations. With its small population and high economic equality, Iceland had long been known for its remarkably low crime rate. Violent crimes were so rare that in some years not a single homicide was recorded. In fact, the police force itself was unarmed. Detective Grimur Grimson wasn't watching the news that Sunday night. But as he finished dinner with his wife, his phone rang. He was instructed to report immediately to Reykjavik's police headquarters. Driving to the station that night, he wasn't overly concerned. In his experience, cases like this rarely turned out to be serious. Each month, several disappearances were reported in Iceland. In the countryside, it was often hunters or hikers who lost their way in the vast, uninhabited landscapes. In urban areas, most missing persons cases involved runaway teenagers, individuals struggling with addiction, or those with mental health conditions, including Alzheimer's patients who had wandered off. More often than not, young adults reported missing in Reykjavik were found within a day or two, usually embarrassed after failing to inform their families that they had crashed at a friend's house for the night. It was, after all, something Berna had done before. Officers had collected a sample of Berna's clothing from her father's house to aid the search dogs. They had also begun reviewing security footage, though Reykjavik's surveillance network was far sparser than in other European capitals. Low crime rates and public opposition to mass surveillance meant that CCTV cameras were scarce. Still, detectives had managed to reconstruct Berna's movements after she left the club early Saturday morning, though the footage they recovered was grainy. In the video, she appeared slightly intoxicated and hungry, stopping at a late-night food stand to buy a falafel pita. Dressed in black boots, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and a black hooded sweatshirt, she walked slowly along the well-lit commercial street. The area was lined with brightly lit storefronts and street lamps every 10 meters, ensuring that, even in the dead of night, the city center remained illuminated. And yet, somewhere between that moment and 5:50 a.m., she vanished. In most places, a young woman walking the streets in the early hours might raise concerns. But in Iceland, It was nothing unusual. People of all ages, men and women alike, moved freely at any time of day or night, secure in the knowledge that violent crime was almost non-existent. Despite the biting wind and the cold temperatures, Berna seemed unfazed. She had had a few too many drinks, and at one point she dropped some coins, bending down to retrieve them before continuing her slow but steady walk. Surveillance footage captured her from multiple angles as she made her way through the city. In one moment, she turned a corner and headed down a narrow street leading toward the sea. Detective Grymour watched the footage carefully, taking note of small details, her dropped coins, the casual brush of her shoulder against a passerby. Then, in the next set of surveillance images, taken a few blocks further, Berna was gone. She had either turned down a side street or gotten into a passing vehicle. Reviewing the footage again, the detectives noticed something: a small red Kia Rio driving in the opposite direction of Berna. Had she gotten into that car? It was a possibility the investigators had to consider, but the video quality was too poor to make out the driver or the license plate. When the police ran a check through the National Vehicle Database, they found over 100 cars of the same make, model, and color in Iceland. By 2 a.m., Berna's parents arrived at the police station. Detective Grimmer showed them the surveillance footage. When Scylla realized they couldn't even identify the red car's license plate, she was furious. To her, it seemed like something that should be simple, just like in the movies. But the officers explained that real-life investigations weren't that straightforward. By Monday afternoon, with no new leads, the police took an unusual step. They held a press conference, appealing to the public for any information that could help locate Berna or identify the driver of the red Kia. Though Scylla still felt that authorities weren't treating her concerns with the urgency they deserved, she agreed to stand beside Grimmour at the press conference. She told reporters about Berna's love for English and travel, mentioning that her daughter and her best friend Maria had been planning a trip to New York. She speculated that Berna, being friendly and outgoing, might have stopped to chat with tourists on her way home. She also revealed that her daughter had recently joined a dating app after ending a relationship. Detective Grymer provided updates on the ongoing search efforts. The case had now been taken up by the Icelandic Search and Rescue Association, an organization with a century-long history of responding to emergencies. In Iceland, natural hazards posed a far greater threat than crime, making this organization's presence in rescue operations a reflection of the country's unique reality. Ordinarily, Icelandic authorities discourage civilians from joining search missions, as untrained volunteers could do more harm than good. But in Berna's case, they made an exception. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people stepped forward to help, marking the beginning of the largest manhunt Iceland had seen in recent memory. Just hours after the press conference, as Monday drew to a close, an unexpected development changed everything. Two young brothers in their 20s decided to retrace the last known signal from her phone. Following their instincts, they made their way to Hafnarfjordur's harbor. There, between the road and the sea, they found a fenced-off industrial site containing 3 massive oil storage tanks. Nearby, in a rugged patch of land strewn with construction materials, they spotted something: a pair of black boots. The brothers immediately recalled the police reports describing Berna's clothing. Wanting to be sure, they searched online for images of the brand of boots she had been wearing. The match was undeniable. Without hesitation, they took a photo and posted it on social media. Police rushed to the harbor, where they met with the brothers, and confirmed that the boots indeed appeared to belong to Berna. At that moment, an intensive search operation was launched in the area. As divers plunged into the icy waters and drones scanned the terrain from above, Detectives under Grimmer's command reviewed security footage from the harbor, and then they found something. At around 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, shortly after Berna had vanished, a red Kia Rio had entered the harbor. The red Kia Rio was found parked beside a trawler named Polar Nanak, a fishing vessel registered under the flag of Greenland. As investigators reviewed the surveillance footage, they noticed a man stepping out of the vehicle from the passenger side. His movements were slow and unsteady. He was clearly intoxicated. Staggering slightly, he made his way toward the ship before the car drove away. This time, luck was on the police's side. The license plate was fully visible, allowing them to quickly trace the vehicle back to a rental company. Upon contacting the business, officers learned that the car had been rented by a crew member of the very fishing vessel captured on security footage. Records showed that the individual who had signed for the car was Thomas Muller Olsen, a 25-year-old Greenlandic national. When authorities requested access to the vehicle, the rental company informed them that Thomas had returned it around midday on Saturday. Since then, it had been rented out again to a young family. Determined to examine the car, the police tracked it down and inspected it thoroughly. It had recently been cleaned. When they interviewed the family, the parents mentioned that their child, who had been sitting in the back seat, had complained about a strong chemical odor. Upon seizing the red Kia for forensic analysis, investigators found reddish stains on the back seat. However, Iceland lacked the forensic facilities to properly analyze the samples, so they were sent, along with a DNA reference sample from Berna, to a laboratory in Sweden. Meanwhile, as detectives attempted to locate Thomas and another unidentified man seen in the footage, they discovered a troubling complication. The Polar Nanak had set sail on the afternoon of Saturday, January 14th, taking both men with it. Despite the setback, investigators dug deeper into Thomas Muller Olsen's background. They learned that he had a prior conviction for drug dealing in Greenland. He was also a trained mixed martial artist and was in a relationship, though he had no children. With suspicions mounting, the case turned into a race against time. For Detective Grimmer and his team, the urgency was clear. The longer the suspects remained at sea, the greater the risk that they could destroy evidence or coordinate their stories. However, the pursuit of the Polar Nanak was not straightforward. The situation required delicate diplomatic negotiations, as law enforcement had to navigate legal jurisdictions, obtain the necessary permissions, and coordinate with maritime authorities. After an intense effort, they finally secured the approvals. With the cooperation of the ship's captain, officers from the Icelandic National Commissioner's Special Unit were transported by helicopter to the fishing vessel, braving harsh weather conditions. Once aboard, they arrested Thomas Muller Olsen and Nicola Olsen, the second man seen in the surveillance footage. Despite sharing a surname, the two men were not related. The ship's captain agreed to comply with the Icelandic authorities, and after 12 tense hours, the Polar Nanak changed course and returned to Icelandic waters. As the ship was searched, officers uncovered 50 pounds of hashish in Thomas's cabin, a significant find, but not the most critical piece of evidence. What truly stunned investigators was what they found in the ship's garbage disposal. There, folded and discarded, was Berna's driver's license. The document was immediately sent to a forensic lab in Norway for fingerprint analysis. To Grimmer, this was damning proof. He was convinced Thomas was responsible for Berna's disappearance. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, Thomas refused to talk. He denied any involvement and provided no information that could help locate the missing woman. As detectives worked to map out the movements of Thomas and Nicola on the night and morning of Berna's disappearance, they uncovered another distinction between the two men. While Thomas had a criminal record, Nicola did not. People who knew Nicola described him as reserved, socially anxious, and deeply introverted. He had a girlfriend and maintained a close relationship with his family, particularly with his sister and her newborn baby. Like Thomas, he proclaimed his innocence, insisting that he had been too intoxicated that night to recall much of anything. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the worst news arrived. On January 22nd, Berna's body was found. The sea had carried her lifeless form to the rocky coast near a lighthouse on the Reykjanes Peninsula, more than 30 miles from where she had disappeared. She was found naked, and when the autopsy was completed, it confirmed that she had drowned in the frigid waters. But that wasn't all. Her body bore additional injuries, bruises on her face and clear marks on her neck, indicating that she had been strangled with force before ending up in the ocean. However, forensic examination found no evidence of sexual assault. The news spread like wildfire. A wave of grief and disbelief washed over Iceland. The phrase "I am Birna" trended across social media as people struggled to process what had happened. For many, the shock went beyond the loss of a young woman. It was an attack on the very fabric of Icelandic society. For Birna's parents, the pain was unbearable. Devastated, they refused to hear the graphic details of their daughter's final moments. Meanwhile, the crew of the Polar Nanak released a statement expressing their condolences, saying they hoped for justice to be served. As a gesture of sorrow, the fishing company donated $15,000 to the volunteers who had tirelessly searched for Birna. Both in Iceland and Greenland, candlelit vigils were held. In Reykjavik, more than 8,000 people gathered for a memorial walk, tracing Birna's final steps through the city, placing flowers at the spot where she was last seen. They ended the procession atop a small hill, lighting candles and sharing a moment of silence in her honor. On February 3rd, Birna was laid to rest. Her funeral was attended by 2,000 mourners, including Iceland's president and prime minister. The ceremony was conducted by the Bishop of Iceland, but respecting the family's wishes, no photographs were taken, as the media had been asked to stay away. Once forensic testing confirmed that the reddish stains found in the red Kia matched Birna's DNA, police formally charged Thomas Muller Olsen with murder and drug possession. His companion, Nicola Olsen, was released after investigators concluded that he had not been present when the crime occurred. According to the case reconstruction, Thomas had dropped off Nicola, who was too intoxicated to recall the night's events. Sometime after, Thomas encountered Birna, and for reasons still unknown, she got into his car. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Thomas never confessed. Over 9 police interrogations, he maintained the same story, though with contradictions. By August, Thomas's trial was about to begin. By then, the prosecution had even stronger evidence. Thomas's DNA was found on the shoelace of one of Birna's boots. His fingerprint was detected on her driver's license, which had been discarded on the Polar Nanak. Surveillance footage showed him buying cleaning supplies and later wiping down the interior of the red Kia. When Thomas entered the courtroom, he covered his face and sat with his back turned to the audience. He pleaded guilty to drug charges but denied the murder. He claimed that he had cleaned the car because his friend had vomited in the back seat. Then, in an attempt to deflect blame, he accused the police of mistreating him while in custody. But then, Nicola testified against him. Though he had initially claimed to remember little from that night, Nicola now pointed to Thomas as the killer. In September, the verdict was reached. Thomas Muller Olsen was found guilty of murder and drug trafficking and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. In addition, the court ordered him to pay about $250,000 in fines and restitution. Months later, the Supreme Court upheld the sentence, rejecting his appeal. Soon after, Thomas was transferred to Denmark, where he would serve out his sentence. In the wake of Berna's murder, Reykjavik authorities expanded the city's CCTV network to increase surveillance. A new women-only ride service was also introduced, aimed at providing safer transportation options at night. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.